sometimes it's not failure that panics you. It's the quiet realization that life isn't moving fast enough.
Wow. Yeah, that really hits hard, doesn't it?
It really does because, I mean, if you are listening to this right now, maybe you're sitting in traffic or, walking the dog or maybe just staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning.
Which is usually when it creeps up on you.
Exactly. Chances are you know exactly what that feeling is.
Yeah.
It's that sudden, inexplicable tightness in your chest when you look at the calendar and realize another month just vanished.
Just completely gone.
Right. And it's this subconscious dread that you are somehow falling behind a schedule you never consciously agreed to, that you're wasting your potential or you're simply not progressing fast enough to hit some invisible deadline.
And it operates almost like like a phantom limb of the mind.
Yeah.
It's not the acute adrenaline-spiking panic of a car swerving into your lane.
Right. It's not a physical threat.
No, it's a chronic, low-grade hum in the background of your daily routine. It's a silent sense of panic that over time just slowly drains the color out of your accomplishments because you're constantly fixated on the next thing you haven't done yet.
Which brings us to today's topic. Today, we are exploring this pervasive modern phenomenon that is clinically referred to as time anxiety.
Yes.
And we aren't just going to commiserate about it, right? We are going to actually dissect it. We have gathered an incredibly fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive.
Really great stuff today.
Yeah, we're looking at clinical psychology research from the International Journal of Indian Psychology that actually measures the quarter-life crisis. We're pulling insights from Harvard Health and UW Medicine on the physiological toll of impatience.
And we're going all the way back to 1954, too.
We are. We're examining Leon Festinger's foundational social comparison theory.
Yeah.
And then we're blending all of that with modern clinical perspectives on the toxicity of hustle culture, dopamine-driven motivation, and the actual literal neuroscience of what rest does to the human brain.
So the mission for this deep dive really is to unpack the biological and psychological root causes of this profound restlessness. We need to understand where it comes from.
Right, like from social media algorithms to our actual brain chemistry.
Exactly. And most importantly, we want to provide you with an actionable, science-backed roadmap to reclaim your focus, to manage that silent panic and, perhaps find a profound sense of peace in the misunderstood concept of slow living.
So let's just start by getting to the root of what time anxiety actually is. Because on the surface, it just looks like being impatient, right? We're just being in a rush.
Yeah, people often confuse the two.
But one of our sources, an article from Psychology Today by Dr. Alex Lickerman, frames this in a way that completely, it reframed my understanding of my own impatience.
Oh, his insights are brilliant.
They really are. He writes extensively about how much he despises being late. And we aren't just talking about being late for a massive job interview or a flight.
Right, the high-stakes stuff.
No, he means being late for a casual party, late for a movie, or incredibly, late for things he planned to do completely by himself.
Which, if we look at it purely through the lens of logic, is a totally irrational fear.
Literally irrational.
Because if you are 15 minutes late to start painting your own garage on a Sunday afternoon, there are no tangible adverse consequences.
None. The garage doesn't care.
Exactly. There is no boss waiting to reprimand you. The universe doesn't care. Yet the body's stress response triggers all the same. Your heart rate goes up, you get tense.
And that's the mystery he unravels. He realized this anxiety was completely out of proportion to reality one afternoon when he and his wife were running late to take their young son to a casual playdate.
Just a standard weekend activity.
Right. But he found himself feeling incredibly agitated. His heart rate was up, he was irritable, and upon reflection, he realized that his visceral panic about the clock wasn't actually about the playdate at all.
It never is.
No. It was fundamentally an anxiety about meaning. He realized that his fear of running out of time in the micro sense, being 10 minutes late, was actually a manifestation of a macro fear, the fear of wasting his life.
And bridging that gap between the mundane and the existential is crucial for understanding time anxiety.
It's so crucial.
When you are rushing through the grocery store aisles, practically running over other carts, your conscious brain isn't thinking, I need to hurry because I am terrified my life lacks overarching purpose.
I mean, that would be a very intense grocery run.
Right. But psychologically, that is often exactly what is happening. That underlying dread of wasted time bleeds into every granular minute of our day.
It just seeps in.
Dr. Lickerman actually notes that when we fail to maximize our time, it triggers this deep, often terrifying subconscious question. Am I creating the greatest amount of value with my life that I possibly can?
That is an unimaginably heavy burden to carry into a traffic jam on a Tuesday morning.
It's exhausting.
If you operate under the subconscious belief that every single lost minute is a lost opportunity to validate your own existence, of course you're going to be in a state of constant silent panic.
You'd have to be. Your brain thinks your survival is tied to efficiency.
And this brings in a fascinating compounding factor from the New York City Psychotherapy Collective. Because they've observed that over the last few years, as we've emerged from the shadow of the global pandemic, this specific flavor of existential time anxiety has absolutely skyrocketed across their patient populations.
Yeah, they identified what they call the fast-forward effect.
The fast forward effect.
Right? Think about the psychological whiplash of the pandemic. For a couple of years, the normal progression of life essentially froze.
It really did. Everything was just on pause.
Milestones were delayed, careers were put in holding patterns, romantic lives were paused, graduations happened in living rooms via webcam.
Yeah, that was brutal for so many people.
And that created a profound collective psychological wound. It created a pervasive sense of lost time.
So when the restrictions lifted and the world started to open back up, people didn't just press play on their lives to resume at a normal speed, they frantically press fast forward.
Exactly. The New York City Psychotherapy Collective points out that this created an intense, almost manic urgency to make up for those lost years.
Like you had to cram 5 years of living into 6 months.
People suddenly felt this overwhelming need to achieve everything immediately.
Yeah.
They needed to get the promotion, find the partner, buy the house, and take the trip, all simultaneously.
Which is impossible.
Totally impossible. And this has led to a massive spike in generalized anxiety. People are walking around with this subconscious trauma response, this underlying fear that time might arbitrarily stop again or be taken from them.
So the logic is, if I don't accomplish everything right now, I'm going to be left with permanent regrets.
Yes. It's a feeling of being hopelessly behind the curve.
And there is a specific demographic that was hit incredibly hard by this, right? Emerging adults.
Oh, absolutely.
This feeling is so pervasive that it's moved beyond pop culture and into rigorous clinical research. It's actively studied as the quarter-life crisis.
Ah.
We have a fascinating piece of research here from the International Journal of Indian Psychology.
Yes, published by researchers Sarah Salome and Dr. B. Selvaraj.
Right. And it looks specifically at individuals between the ages of 18 and 29.
Exploring the methodology of this study is really revealing. They looked at 71 individuals in this specific age bracket.
Which is such a chaotic age.
It is. Developmentally speaking, this decade is characterized by an intense density of exploration and expectation. You are supposed to figure out your higher education, launch a career, potentially find a life partner, and define your independent identity.
It's just a period of massive, concentrated transition. Everything happens at once.
Right. So to measure the psychological state of these young adults, the researchers utilized two established clinical tools: the Developmental Crisis Questionnaire, the DCQ-12, and the Perceived Stress Scale, or PSS-10.
Let's break those down for the listener. What exactly are these tools asking a 25-year-old?
Well, the PSS-10 is a widely used psychological instrument for measuring the perception of stress. It asks questions about how unpredictable, uncontrollable, and overloaded respondents find their lives.
Okay, so just generally how stressed you feel.
Yes. The DCQ-12, on the other hand, is specifically designed to measure the dimensions of a quarter-life crisis. It breaks this crisis down into distinct subscales to see exactly what part of life is causing the panic.
That's super interesting, so they can pinpoint the trigger.
Exactly. Two of the most critical subscales they measured were disconnection and distress, and lack of clarity and control.
And the data points they uncovered here are the key to understanding why we panic about slow progress.
They really are. The researchers found a very strong positive correlation between those two feelings: disconnection and lack of control and high perceived stress.
So those are directly linked.
Strongly linked. In statistical terms, the correlation for disconnection and distress was 0.460. And for lack of clarity and control, it was 0.375. In the realm of behavioral psychology, those are robust, highly significant links.
So translating that into everyday experience, the more isolated you feel from your peers and the more you feel like you have absolutely no map for your life, the higher your stress spikes.
Exactly.
If you don't know what you're doing, you panic. I mean, that part is intuitive. But the study throws a massive curveball when it looks at a third subscale, doesn't it?
Yes, the subscale they called turning point and transition. This measures the actual objective experience of going through a major life change.
And common sense would dictate that going through a massive life transition, like moving across the country, starting a terrifying new job, or ending a long-term relationship, would be the primary driver of the stress.
Right, you would assume the change itself is the trigger, that the forward momentum is what hurts.
But the data completely contradicts that. The researchers found a weak negative correlation, specifically a negative 0.082 between the turning point and transition subscale and perceived stress.
And that negative correlation is the crux of the issue. It wasn't statistically significant as a driver of stress. What this empirically suggests is that not all transitions are inherently distressing.
Wait, so the change itself isn't the problem?
No, you can go through a monumental life upheaval and actually experience it as an exhilarating opportunity for growth, provided you possess clarity and a sense of control.
All right, let me make sure I'm fully wrapping my head around the mechanics of this, because
Okay.
this is huge.
It is huge.
The actual change, the forward momentum, isn't what freaks us out. It's the feeling of driving blindfolded.
I like that.
Imagine you were in the passenger seat of a sports car going 120 miles an hour. The raw speed itself isn't necessarily a negative experience. If you are strapped in, you trust the driver, and you can see a clear, straight track ahead of you, going 120 miles an hour is thrilling.
It's a rush.
Right. The silent panic only sets in when you suddenly realize there is no steering wheel, the brakes are gone, and the windshield has been painted black.
That analogy perfectly isolates the variables. The transition, the aging process, the career moves that is just the speed of the car. The lack of clarity and control is the missing steering wheel and the blacked-out windshield.
That makes so much sense.
When emerging adults, or frankly anyone at any stage of life, feel like they are moving rapidly through time but have no agency over the direction and no clear map of their destination, that is when the crisis takes hold.
So the anxiety isn't about moving too slow.
No, it's about moving blindly and fearing you'll never arrive at a meaningful destination.
But knowing that we're lacking a map doesn't solve the panic. In fact, it triggers a secondary, much more dangerous psychological trap.
It really does.
Because if you are lost in a dense forest and you don't have a compass, human nature forces you to look at what everyone else is doing to find your bearings. When we lose our own internal timeline, we start desperately measuring ourselves against the external timelines of other people.
And this phenomenon was formally codified in 1954 by the social psychologist Leon Festinger. He developed what we know as social comparison theory.
Right.
To understand why we do this to ourselves, we have to look at Festinger's core premise. His very first hypothesis was that human beings possess a fundamental evolutionary drive to evaluate our own opinions and abilities.
We have to know where we stand.
Yes, we have a biological need to know where we stand in the hierarchy of the world.
It's a survival mechanism, basically. We want to know if we are strong enough, fast enough, smart enough to survive the winter or stay in the tribe.
Exactly. But Festinger's second hypothesis is where the anxiety originates. He posited that if objective, non-social means are not available to measure ourselves, we will evaluate our abilities by comparing them to other people.
Because objective measurements are actually incredibly rare when it comes to the things we care about most.
They really are.
I mean, if I want to know exactly how tall I am, I use a tape measure. Objective, non-social. If I want to know how fast I can run a mile, I use a stopwatch. Objective. But if I want to know if I'm successful for a 35-year-old, if I want to know if my marriage is happy enough, or if my career trajectory is impressive, there is no tape measure for that in the physical universe.
No stopwatch for a happy marriage.
So what do? We look at other 35-year-olds.
And the subsequent research that expanded on Festinger's work broke down the mechanics of how we make these comparisons. We tend to engage in two distinct directions.
Downward and upward.
Yes, downward social comparisons and upward social comparisons. Understanding the difference explains a lot about our daily mood swings.
Let's unpack the downward comparison first, because it's a fascinating psychological defense mechanism.
It is. A downward comparison occurs when you look at an individual or a group that you consider to be worse off than yourself.
Yeah.
We do this subconsciously to elevate our own self-regard and protect our subjective well-being.
To make ourselves feel better.
Exactly. The Wikipedia source details a rather poignant clinical example of this research conducted on breast cancer patients.
Wow, okay.
The study found that the majority of these patients continually made comparisons with other patients who were less fortunate than themselves.
Really?
Yes. A woman with an early stage diagnosis would look at someone with a more advanced stage of the disease and feel a profound sense of relief and gratitude for her own situation, despite her own objective suffering.
That is so deeply human.
It is. Another researcher named Ashby found identical behavioral patterns in patients recovering from severe heart disease. Downward comparisons can genuinely provide psychological comfort and stabilize our mood when we are in distress.
But let's be honest, when we are lying in bed at night feeling that silent panic about our life moving too slowly, we aren't usually making downward comparisons, are we?
Definitely not.
We're doing the exact opposite.
We are engaging in upward social comparisons. This is when you measure yourself against someone you perceive as superior, more successful, wealthier, or simply further ahead in life.
Which is a recipe for anxiety.
Now, it's worth noting, a researcher named Collins pointed out that upward comparisons aren't universally destructive. They can provide necessary inspiration.
Like a mentor.
Right. An amateur chess player studying a grandmaster is making an upward comparison that facilitates learning. But far more frequently, especially in areas tied to our core identity, upward comparisons act as a brutal spotlight on our own perceived inadequacies.
They just highlight what we don't have.
And that significantly lowers our self-regard.
And the environment in which we make these comparisons has completely mutated over the last 15 years.
It's a completely different landscape now.
I want to pull from the Wonder Mind source here because it nails the modern context. Evolutionarily, our comparison group was limited to the 150 people in our physical village. You only had to be doing slightly better than the blacksmith down the street to feel successful.
Right, the scale was so small.
Today, if you open Instagram or LinkedIn, you are instantaneously bombarded with literally millions of people doing objectively incredible things. You see your peers landing massive promotions, buying second homes, taking exotic vacations, and raising seemingly flawless children.
And it's constant. It's a fire hose of success.
As the psychotherapist John Sillen-Paris states in the article, if you compare, you despair, it's just a fact.
The clinical psychologist Dr. Nina Paulinet brings up a specific, highly toxic manifestation of this. The 30 under 30 lists, published by major magazines.
Oh, I hate those lists. They cause so much anxiety.
We are constantly exposed to these highly curated, statistically exceptional milestones, but the media consumption environment presents them as the baseline norm.
Like everybody should be doing it.
Yes. This creates an expectation mismatch. You begin to believe that achieving massive, world-changing success by age 28 is standard, which turns your own perfectly normal, gradual life progression into a source of deep shame.
It creates a phenomenon that Dr. Jenny Wang describes as the hamster wheel effect.
That's a great term.
You are running as fast as your legs will carry you. You are working incredibly hard at your job. But because you are constantly scrolling past a never-ending feed of people who seem to be light years ahead of you, you feel like you're entirely stationary.
You're sweating, but you're not moving.
Right. The dopamine hit of achieving a personal goal is instantly wiped out by seeing someone else achieve a bigger one.
And we cannot ignore the cultural architecture that turbocharges this anxiety. The research highlights how cultural dimensions deeply affect social comparison theory.
The culture we live in plays a huge role.
Massive. Individualistic cultures, predominantly the United States and much of Western Europe, place a massive psychological emphasis on an independent view of the self.
The whole bootstrap mentality.
Exactly. The cultural narrative is built on the myth of the self-made individual standing out from the crowd. The data shows that individuals operating in individualistic cultures are far more likely to engage in chronic social comparisons.
That makes sense.
And they exhibit much higher baseline levels of competitiveness. They have an ingrained societal mandate to distinguish themselves.
So the anxiety is actually baked right into the culture. Contrast that with a collectivistic culture.
In deeply collectivistic cultures, which emphasize group harmony and interconnectedness, the mechanics of upward comparison work differently.
How so?
Well, an upward comparison to a member of your own in-group can actually result in positive effects on your personal self-esteem, because the individual's identity is strongly tethered to the group's collective success. A win for the group is a win for the individual.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is. But in a hyper-individualistic society, someone else's success is frequently internalized as a spotlight on your own personal failure.
Which is so isolating.
Furthermore, researchers Garcia and Tor discovered a fascinating nuance. Competitiveness increases exponentially the closer you are to a standard.
Wait, what does that mean?
If you are in a highly competitive academic environment or a cutthroat corporate ladder where numerical rankings matter, the closer you get to the top, the more intensely and ruthlessly competitive you become with the peers directly adjacent to you.
So the panic actually gets worse the closer you get to success.
Yes, the stakes feel higher.
Let's visualize what this does to a person's reality. Using social media or corporate rankings to gauge your life progress is exactly like trying to measure your height using a funhouse mirror at a carnival.
Oh, I love this analogy.
You know, intellectually, the mirror is a piece of curved glass fundamentally built to distort the truth. It stretches the reality of other people's lives to make them look impossibly tall, wealthy, and successful, while compressing your own reflection.
It's literally designed to deceive you.
But here is the psychological tragedy. Even knowing it's a funhouse mirror, when we look into it and see ourselves as short, we still experience visceral panic. The primitive part of our brain bypasses logic and internalizes the distortion as absolute reality.
And that creates a massive state of cognitive dissonance. We possess a fundamental drive to believe we are competent and doing well, but the digital environment we expose ourselves to for hours every day constantly screams that we are disastrously behind.
So how do we deal with that?
Well, how does the human animal resolve that painful dissonance? By attempting to alter reality. We try to run faster. We try to work harder. We try to force our lives to match the funhouse mirror.
And that desperate behavioral response leads us directly into a structural trap. This distorted panic pushes us into a state of perpetual overdrive, which modern society has neatly packaged and sold to us as hustle culture.
Hustle culture is the logical, albeit incredibly toxic, endpoint of unregulated time anxiety.
It's the monetization of our fear of falling behind.
Let's examine the anatomy of this trap using the clinical analysis from Locke Behavioral Health. They define hustle culture not just as working hard, but as a pervasive, inescapable ethos that demands constant, agonizing striving.
The rise and grind mentality.
Exactly. It's the normalization of working from dawn to dusk, measuring your entire human self-worth by your economic output, and maintaining 24/7 availability on Slack or email.
It's exhausting just talking about it.
But the most insidious psychological trick of hustle culture is how it frames the concept of rest.
Right.
It frames taking a break or needing sleep as a moral failing or a sign of weakness, and it equates constant busyness with virtue.
And this is where we have to look at the hard clinical data, because the biological cost of this mentality is staggering. The desire for rapid, unceasing progress fueled by dopamine-driven motivation where you're only chasing the next hit of achievement doesn't just make you tired.
It does so much more than that.
It severely damages your emotional states, your executive decision-making, and literally alters the physical architecture of your brain.
Wait, let me emphasize that for the listener, because the Locke Behavioral article cites a deeply concerning MRI-based study.
Yeah, let's get into the MRI study.
They looked at the brain topography of individuals who routinely worked more than 52 hours a week. When compared to control groups who worked standard hours, the overworkers exhibited demonstrable structural differences in 17 different brain regions.
17 distinct regions physically changed by working 12 extra hours a week. That is wild.
The human brain is highly neuroplastic. It physically adapts to the environment it is forced into. And the regions altered weren't just random supportive tissues, these were core regions.
Like which ones?
Regions intimately tied to executive function on prefrontal cortex, emotional regulation in the amygdala, and memory consolidation in the hippocampus.
The big ones.
Exactly. Chronic stress and a lack of recovery flood the brain with cortisol, which over time can actually atrophy these critical areas. Sustained overwork physically alters the hardware of the brain, potentially on a long-term basis.
Now, I can hear a skeptic, maybe a junior lawyer trying to make a partner or an entrepreneur trying to get a startup off the ground, pushing back hard on this.
Well, they always do.
They might say, look, I understand the cortisol issue, but empirically, if I work 60 hours a week instead of 40, I am quite literally producing 20 more hours of output. I am getting more widgets made. Even if I'm tired, I am moving faster than my competition.
The classic capitalist argument.
Right. So how does the science respond to that purely capitalist argument?
The science dismantles it through the concept of cognitive depletion. The capitalist argument assumes that human mental energy is an infinite, linear resource.
That you can just keep withdrawing from the bank.
Exactly. But it is not. Your mental resources are highly finite. When you overtax them without allowing for biological recovery, your core cognitive faculties begin to degrade rapidly.
So you get diminishing returns.
Severe diminishing returns. This leads to profound decision fatigue. You might physically be sitting at your desk for 14 hours, but the quality of the strategic decisions you are making, the code you are writing, or the legal arguments you are drafting in hour 12 are likely abysmal.
Because your brain is fried.
Your working memory degrades to the point where you are making simple errors that will take hours to fix the next day.
The lot behavioral piece brings up a term that perfectly captures this illusion of productivity. They talk about a meta-review across various workplace studies showing that burnout, depression, and anxiety don't just cause absenteeism where you are too sick to come to work.
Right.
They cause a massive epidemic of presenteeism.
Presenteeism is a fascinating and deeply destructive phenomenon. It's when you are physically occupying a chair at work, you are staring intently at your screen, but you are cognitively impaired by exhaustion or anxiety.
You are essentially a ghost in the office.
A ghost is a perfect way to put it. You are going through the physical motions of working, but you are producing drastically worse results, making more errors, and taking 3 times as long to complete simple tasks because your brain cannot maintain focus.
Let's put this incredible irony into perspective for a second.
Let's do it.
We are terrified of wasting our time, right? The silent panic tells us we are falling behind. So, to alleviate that panic, we force ourselves into a state of hustle that structurally damages our brain and induces severe cognitive depletion.
It's a vicious cycle.
And in that state, we are literally biologically incapable of using our time effectively. It's like noticing the engine of your car is smoking and the temperature gauge is pinned to the red.
Never a good sign.
But because you are terrified of being late to your destination, you slam your foot harder onto the gas pedal, convinced that stopping for 10 minutes to let it cool down is a waste of time.
Which is madness.
You think you are going faster, but you're actually just melting the engine block and mathematically guaranteeing that you will never reach your destination at all.
The self-sabotage is profound. By refusing to rest, driven by the anxiety of slow progress, we destroy the very vehicle required to make progress in the first place.
So if the engine is smoking and we intellectually understand that we need to pull over, well, how do we actually do it? Because for someone steeped in time anxiety, taking a break feels like admitting defeat. It feels like failing.
It feels extremely uncomfortable.
How do we cool the engine down without being consumed by the crushing guilt that we aren't moving forward?
We have to completely redefine what the concept of resting actually means, biologically and neurologically.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have to strip away the moral judgments imposed by hustle culture that rest is laziness, and look purely at the science of what the brain is doing when we stop.
Let's do exactly that. Let's look at the neuroscience of deep rest and intentional focus, again, drawing from the clinical analysis. First, we need to completely shatter the myth that resting is doing nothing.
This is perhaps the most important paradigm shift for anyone dealing with time anxiety. When your physical body is still and you are not actively focused on a demanding external task, your brain does not power down like a laptop closing.
It's not off.
Not at all. In fact, functional MRI imaging shows that when the mind is quote-unquote at rest, a massive, highly coordinated network of dispersed brain regions suddenly activates and starts communicating with each other.
And what is that network called?
Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, or the DMN.
The default mode network. So if I am sitting on a park bench staring at the clouds, supposedly doing nothing, what exactly is the DMN doing?
It is doing the heavy cognitive lifting of being a functional human being.
Wow.
The DMN is the background processor responsible for memory consolidation, profound self-reflection, moral reasoning, and creativity. It takes all the frantic, disjointed data inputs you gather during your busy day and weaves them into a coherent understanding of the world.
Like putting puzzle pieces together.
Think of it like a computer running a complex defragmentation program on a hard drive. It only works when you aren't actively opening new files.
That makes perfect sense.
The Lot Behavioral article cites a brilliant NIH study that illustrates this mechanism perfectly. Researchers had participants practice a new, highly specific physical task, like typing a complex code on a keyboard.
Okay.
Then, they gave the participants brief rest periods where they did absolutely nothing. During those rest periods, the brain scans showed that the participants' brains were actively replaying compressed, high-speed versions of that exact typing activity.
Whoa. So while they were just sitting there staring at the wall, their brains were autonomously firing the exact neural pathways required to master the skill they had just been practicing.
Precisely. The rest period wasn't a break from learning. It was the biological mechanism of learning.
That is mind-blowing.
Rest is an intensely active biological process. It is the time required for internal processing, integration, and cellular regeneration. Without it, you're just constantly downloading data without ever giving the system time to save it to the hard drive.
That reframes rest from a luxury into a biological necessity for high performance.
It really does.
But we need to make a critical distinction here because not all rest is created equal. There is a vast physiological difference between true biological deep rest and just numbing out.
A vital distinction. A framework developed by researchers at UCSF distinguishes between deep rest and casual downtime.
What's the difference?
Deep rest involves entering physiological states that trigger actual cellular level repair and regeneration. This includes activities like formal meditation, yoga, or contemplative silent walks in nature.
Quiet activities.
Yes, these specific activities send a profound physiological signal of safety to your nervous system. This allows the body to shift out of the sympathetic nervous system, which is your high-alert, cortisol-driven fight-or-flight mode, and drop into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest recovery mode.
Now contrast that with what most of us actually do when we are exhausted and decide to take a break.
Oh boy.
We flop onto the couch, we pull out our smartphones, and we endlessly scroll through social media, or we binge watch a highly stimulating true crime documentary.
Right. And while that might feel like a temporary distraction from your job, it does not reliably engage those deeper parasympathetic restorative processes.
Because it's too stimulating.
Exactly. Watching a high-stakes television show or scrolling through an Instagram feed that triggers your upward social comparisons does not signal safety to your nervous system. Your brain is still processing rapid-fire visual and emotional stimuli.
So you're still stressed.
Your cortisol levels remain elevated. It is a distraction, but it is not true cognitive rest.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate again.
Go for it.
If I'm listening to this and I work a demanding corporate 9-to-5 job, or realistically a 9-to-8 job, how on earth am I supposed to integrate deep rest? My manager doesn't care about my default mode network or my parasympathetic nervous system. They just need the Q3 spreadsheet finished by end of day.
And that's the reality for most people. This is where we look at the biology of human rhythms, which don't require you to go to a meditation retreat.
Okay, good.
Physiologists have identified a critical human operating rhythm called the basic rest activity cycle, or BRZ. This is an ultradian rhythm of approximately 90 minutes.
Ultradian meaning biological cycles that occur multiple times within a single day, as opposed to circadian rhythms, which dictate our 24-hour sleep-wake cycle.
Correct. Throughout your entire waking day, your brain naturally oscillates through periods of high, focused alertness, followed inevitably by a natural biological drop in arousal every 90 minutes or so.
So you can't be focused forever.
No, you start to lose focus, you fidget, you feel a dip in energy. This is your biology literally demanding that you slow down and let the DMN engage.
Just built into us.
Fighting this 90-minute cycle with sheer willpower and caffeine is like fighting gravity. You can't win long term.
So all those popular productivity hacks like the Pomodoro technique or the 90 minutes on, 20 minutes off rule aren't just arbitrary time management tricks. They're actually anchored in deep human biology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if your corporate environment doesn't allow for a full 20-minute break, there is immense, scientifically validated power in what the literature calls micro breaks.
Micro breaks. Just a few minutes.
Yes, a comprehensive 2022 meta-analysis reviewed 22 different experimental studies looking at breaks that were under 10 minutes long. The aggregated data found that these micro breaks significantly boost overall vigor, radically reduce end-of-day fatigue, and demonstrably improve cognitive performance on complex tasks.
So taking 5 minutes to just stand up, breathe deeply, or look out a window isn't slacking off. It's vital biological maintenance.
That's a great way to put it.
It reminds me of working on a massive document on an old computer. Hitting Control-S to save your work takes maybe 2 seconds. It momentarily stops your workflow. But if you refuse to take those 2 seconds because you are too busy typing to stop, and then your computer inevitably crashes, you lose hours of work.
A nightmare.
Micro breaks are how you hit save on your cognitive function. You aren't losing time. You are securing the work you've already done.
That is a brilliant visualization. But here's the challenge. To truly integrate these micro moments of rest into our day without feeling that crushing wave of guilt, we can't just slap a 5-minute breathing exercise onto a hyper-anxious, fast-forwarded life.
It's not a quick fix.
No, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
We need a much broader lifestyle philosophy. Managing time anxiety isn't just about taking scheduled breaks. It's about fundamentally changing the speed at which we choose to operate.
Which requires a total paradigm
Yeah.
shift. We have to talk about slow living, shifting our metric of success from pure quantity to actual quality.
Yes.
This is where we turn to the incredible insights from the Harvard Health article by Matthew Solon. I'll admit, when I first heard the term slow living, I immediately pictured something highly unrealistic.
What did you picture?
I pictured selling all my belongings, moving to a rustic cabin in the woods, growing my own heirloom tomatoes, and spending all day staring at a river. And that is the most common and most dismissive misconception of the movement. Laura Malloy, the director of the Successful Aging Program at the Benson Henry Institute, clarifies this beautifully in the article.
What'd she say?
She explicitly states that slow living does not mean doing less, being lazy, abandoning your ambition, or giving up on your life goals.
So it's not about dropping out of society.
No. She defines it as the practice of doing more with greater focus and purpose and doing it at the right speed.
The right speed. I like that.
It's a ruthless evaluation of what is actually important in your life, choosing to put significantly more energy into those fewer things, and valuing the quality of your attention over the sheer quantity of your output.
Let's unpack the hidden physiological benefits of adopting this philosophy. Because this isn't just about feeling a little more zen, it alters your physical health markers.
The physical outcomes are profound. When you intentionally slow your internal rhythm and become deeply mindful of your present actions, you lower your baseline cortisol levels.
Which is huge.
This directly lowers your resting blood pressure and reduces systemic inflammation. From a cognitive standpoint, removing the constant rush improves your concentration and significantly bolsters your short-term memory function.
Like actually remembering if you locked the front door or where you set down your keys or if you turned off the stove before leaving the house.
Exactly. When you are rushing through your morning on anxious autopilot, your brain literally does not record those mundane actions into memory.
Because it's already thinking about the 10 a.m. meeting.
Right. Furthermore, the article points out an interesting physical benefit. Slow living encourages a much greater somatic awareness of your physical surroundings.
So you're just more aware of your body.
People who practice slow living are statistically less likely to trip, fall, drop things, or make clumsy physical missteps because their brain is actually paying attention to how their body is moving through physical space rather than projecting 10 minutes into the future.
Okay, so how do you, the person listening right now, someone with a job, a mortgage, and a busy life, actually execute this?
The practical application.
Yes, the Harvard Health article gives 5 incredibly practical strategies for adopting a slower pace without quitting your job, and we need to go through them in detail. The first strategy is to engage in routines mindfully.
Consider how many daily tasks we execute, completely mindlessly showering, washing the dishes, making the morning coffee, folding laundry.
Almost all of them.
The strategy here is to stop doing them on autopilot. When you step into the shower, do not use that 5 minutes to agonizingly rehearse what you are going to say in your 10 a.m. performance review.
Which is so tempting to do.
Choose to be fully physically present. Notice the specific temperature of the water. Notice the smell of the soap.
Yeah.
Feel the sensation of the water hitting your skin.
Just grounding yourself in the physical reality.
Yes. If your anxious mind wanders back to your to-do list, and it will gently, without judgment, pull your focus back to the physical sensations of the shower. Malloy notes that practicing this kind of sensory grounding during mundane tasks can dramatically slow your internal rhythm for the rest of the entire day.
The second strategy they suggest is the mindful walk. A lot of us walk just to close the rings on our smartwatch, to hit a step count, or to aggressively commute from point A to point B while listening to a podcast on 1.5x speed.
We turn walking into a metric.
Exactly. The goal here is to carve out a walk used specifically to practice mindfulness. Look at the architecture of the buildings, listen to the wind, feel the sun on your face. You have to remove the pressure of a destination from the equation. You are walking just to walk.
The third strategy builds on our earlier discussion of the DMN. It's the mini unplug.
Ooh, the mini unplug.
This involves intentionally carving out 15 to 20 minutes each day to be entirely, completely disconnected from the digital world. No phone in your pocket, no smartwatch buzzing, no television in the background, no external inputs whatsoever. You just exist in a space.
That sounds terrifying for some people.
It is at first.
Yeah.
But research shows that this specific type of sensory deprivation, which allows your mind to wander aimlessly, radically enhances your baseline creativity. improves complex problem solving, and acts as a hard reset for an overstimulated nervous system.
Strategy 4 is taking up a hobby that forces you to be attentive because you actually enjoy the tactile experience of it, like knitting, gardening, or woodworking, something where the process is the point, not the product.
Very important distinction.
And strategy 5, which might be the hardest for modern workers, is single tasking.
Hustle culture has practically deified the concept of multitasking, but neuroscience confirms that human brains are neurologically incapable of it.
Wait, really? We can't multitask?
We do not multitask. We engage in rapid task switching. We jump from writing an email to checking a text to listening to a meeting, back to the email.
Which feels productive.
It feels productive, but this rapid switching burns an immense amount of cognitive glucose and spikes anxiety. The slow living advice here is to do only one single chore or task at a time.
Just one thing.
If you are folding the laundry, just fold the laundry. Put your phone in another room. Leave the rest of the overwhelming to-do list for later. Executing one task to completion offers a profound sense of psychological satisfaction and control that you simply never experience when you are frantically juggling 5 things at once.
Okay, I love these strategies, but I have to push back hard here on behalf of the chronically anxious listener.
I expect nothing less.
Everything you just described, the mindful dishwashing, the single tasking sounds wonderful in a vacuum, but if you have been vibrating at the frequency of panic for the last 5 or 10 years, trying to mindfully wash a single dish feels like absolute torture.
It does.
It's like dopamine withdrawal. When you are used to eating life at a fast food pace, being forced to sit down and savor a 5-course meal is agonizing at first. You sit down in a quiet room to do your 15-minute mini unplug, and within 30 seconds, the silent panic starts screaming at you. You are wasting time! You could be answering emails! Look at Instagram! You're falling behind!
It gets really loud.
How do we mentally cope with the sheer visceral discomfort of slowing down?
That is the ultimate crux of the issue. You are experiencing very real physiological withdrawal from the adrenaline and dopamine cycles of the hustle. Your brain has been trained to associate speed with safety and stillness with danger.
Wow, stillness is danger.
To truly embrace slow living, we cannot just change our physical speed. We need robust psychological strategies to manage that silent panic when it inevitably flares up during our attempts to rest.
Which brings us to the final and most crucial piece of this deep dive. Strategies for managing panic and setting realistic expectations. How do we survive the withdrawal?
We have to address the fear directly.
Let's draw from the New York City Psychotherapy Collective again. Their first piece of clinical advice is perhaps the most counterintuitive. When the panic hits, don't run from it.
Naming the fear is the vital first step. When you sit down to unplug and that wave of time anxiety spikes, your instinct is to immediately grab your phone to self-soothe with distraction.
Just to numb the feeling.
Instead, sit in the discomfort. The therapists advise practicing somatic tracking. You literally say out loud to yourself, I am feeling anxious right now. I am experiencing fear.
You actually say out loud.
Yes, you take the amorphous, terrifying cloud of panic and you give it a concrete label. Then you get deeply curious about it. Ask yourself, where is this feeling living in my physical body right now? Is my chest tight? Is my jaw clenched? Is my stomach in knots?
So you objectify it.
By shifting into the role of an observer of your own anxiety, you deactivate the amygdala's panic alarm and engage the prefrontal cortex's logical processing.
And then they suggest interrogating the underlying narrative of the fear. Ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of happening if I run out of time today?
Right. If you follow the fear down the rabbit hole, what does it really mean to run out of time on this specific Tuesday? You often realize that the catastrophic outcome you are subconsciously dreading is entirely fabricated.
You're not actually in danger.
You won't die if the email is sent tomorrow. You won't become a failure if you take 20 minutes to watch the sunset.
And a massive amount of that fabricated dread stems from how we have been conditioned to view success. The Wondermind article highlights a fantastic point from John Paris about the results-oriented trap.
The results-oriented trap, yes.
We feel panic because we have bought into the illusion that we must have the right answers at all times and that we must achieve massive, flawless results on a rapid timeline.
But the clinical reality is that success is not a linear, failure-free journey. Focusing purely on the flawless end result creates an unsustainable, paralyzing perfectionism that fuels time anxiety.
It's just a setup for failure.
Mina B., a mental health educator cited in the article, reminds us that good things, enduring things, come via growth. And failure is not the opposite of growth. Failure is simply a necessary data point in that growth.
A data point. I like that framing.
Overcoming adversity, facing delays, and managing setbacks are the exact mechanisms that build long-term emotional resilience.
Which leads to a piece of behavioral advice I absolutely love from Dr. Nina Polanyi. She says, we need to stop waiting for massive, culturally sanctioned milestones to feel proud of ourselves. She says, and I quote, throw a damn party for paying your rent on time.
It sounds slightly silly on the surface, but it is neurologically profound.
How so?
When you only allow yourself to feel pride, when you achieve something massive, the major promotion, buying a house, getting married, you starve your brain of dopamine for years at a time.
You're just running on empty.
You destroy your daily self-worth.
Oh, work.
By actively, intentionally celebrating the small wins, the mundane daily realities of existing and surviving, you honor your own resilience. You build a foundation of self-worth that is entirely independent of those massive, socially constructed milestones that cause so much comparison anxiety.
Throw a party for the basics. Surviving a hard week is an achievement.
Absolutely.
But we also have to address the elephant in the room. What happens when the time anxiety isn't just fabricated panic? What happens when time does actually pass and a door permanently closes?
This is a very sensitive but incredibly vital area to explore, and the UW-Medicine article by Luke Whelan, featuring clinical psychologist Douglas Lane, addresses it beautifully.
It's a really grounded perspective.
We have to acknowledge objective reality. We do not control time. It passes regardless of our anxiety. And sometimes, because of the passage of time, we do miss opportunities.
Right.
You might age out of a highly competitive sport. You might miss a certain career window that you spent your 20s dreaming about. You might face the biological reality that you aren't going to have children in the timeline or the manner you always envisioned.
And Dr. Lane says it is healthy and absolutely necessary to grieve that. We shouldn't toxically positive our way out of it.
Yes, do not ignore the pain of a closed door. Grieve the missed opportunity. Feel the sadness.
Let yourself feel it.
But, and this is the critical psychological pivot, do not get stuck in the grief. Once you process the emotion, you have to look deeper at the underlying architecture of your desires. You must ask yourself why that specific goal mattered to you so much in the first place. What were the core fundamental values beneath the specific goal?
The article uses a great relatable example. Say you always had a life goal to run a full marathon, but now you are older, you have severe arthritis in your hips, and a 26.2-mile run is physically, objectively impossible.
What happens?
You grieve the loss of the marathon identity, but then you ask, why did I actually want it? Was it truly about the 26.2 miles? Or was it the feeling of physical endurance? Was it the mental discipline of training? Was it the camaraderie of the running community?
Exactly. You deconstruct the goal to find the value. And once you identify the core value, you pivot. You honor that value by finding a new avenue of expression.
So you don't give up on the value.
Never. You train for a 10K instead. Or you take up distance swimming, which is easier on the joints. Or you commit to a rigorous 30-minute daily walking routine. You find a new way to express the core value that isn't dependent on the door that closed.
It's about adaptability.
Dr. Lane talks about a patient facing the painful reality that they won't have biological children. They grieved that profound loss, but then they realized the core value beneath the desire was a drive to nurture the next generation and pass on wisdom.
So what did they do?
So they pivot. They channel that deep value into adoption, or becoming a deeply involved and supportive aunt or uncle, or dedicating time to mentoring at-risk youth. The value survives. Only the vehicle changes.
I want to talk directly to anyone listening who feels like they've fallen irreparably behind. This psychological process of grieving the closed door and pivoting to the core value, it's exactly like looking at the GPS map on a long road trip and suddenly realizing you completely missed your exit 20 miles back.
Oh, that's a great metaphor.
You have a choice in that moment. You can panic, scream at yourself for being stupid, and accidentally crash the car into a ditch trying to illegally cross the median. Or you can take a deep breath, accept that the exit is gone, and simply let the GPS reroute you.
The recalculating moment.
You are still driving. You still have a vehicle. You are still moving forward. You are just taking a different, perhaps more scenic, route to find meaning.
That rerouting process is the very essence of making peace with time. Dr. Lane notes an incredibly uplifting phenomenon. Older individuals, people who are much closer to the end of their lives, actually get exceptionally good at this.
Because they have perspective.
As they age, they stop projecting their anxiety entirely into the distant future, and they get very, very good at living for today. They frequently ask themselves, What happened today that was valuable to me? Why am I doing what I am doing in this exact moment?
It reminds me of the story Dr. Lane tells in the article about driving to his daughter's volleyball game. He was driving straight from a long, exhausting day at the clinic. He was tired, he was rushed, the time anxiety was creeping in.
We've all been there.
But he stopped and had to consciously remind himself why he was spending his precious time doing this. It wasn't an obligation. It was because he wanted his kid to look back on her childhood and remember that her dad was always on the sidelines cheering for her. He stripped away the anxiety by finding the profound meaning in the immediate present moment.
Striving to fill your present, immediate moments with intentional meaning, even very small meanings, is the ultimate clinical antidote to the fear of time passing. It completely neutralizes the silent panic.
We have covered an immense, deep landscape of human psychology today. Let's synthesize this journey.
Let's do it.
We started by exploring how that silent panic, that relentless time anxiety, is rarely actually about the clock. We saw through Dr. Lickerman's experience that it is fundamentally driven by a deep, existential desire for meaning and a terror of wasting our brief lives.
We then examined the data behind the crisis. We saw how the fast-forward effect of the pandemic, combined with the quarter-life crisis, robs us of our sense of clarity and control, leaving us feeling like we are driving blindfolded at 120 miles an hour.
So terrifying.
And when we lose our own map, we inevitably fall into the vicious trap of social comparison theory. We use the curated funhouse mirrors of social media to judge our own worth, creating an expectation mismatch that inevitably makes us feel inadequate.
We discussed how that deep inadequacy drives us into the toxic, exhausting arms of hustle culture, tricking us into trying to outrun our anxiety.
A treadmill.
We saw the terrifying clinical data showing how sustained overwork literally alters the architecture of 17 brain regions, degrading our cognitive abilities through sheer, unyielding exhaustion and presenteeism.
But we also looked at the hard neurobiology, proving that the brain desperately needs deep rest to function. We learned about the vital background processing of the default mode network, the biological reality of our 90-minute ultradian rhythms, and how hitting Control-S through micro breaks is actually the ultimate prerequisite for sustainable focus.
Finally, we explored the restorative physiological power of slow living, shifting our metric of success from frantic quantity to intentional quality.
A paradigm shift.
We talked about mindfully washing the dishes, single tasking, and the power of the mini unplug. And most importantly, we armed ourselves with psychological tools to survive the dopamine withdrawal of slowing down. Naming our fears out loud, reframing failure as a data point for growth, throwing a party for paying the rent, and learning how to let a GPS reroute us when we inevitably miss an exit in life.
It all comes back to how we choose to measure the value of our own existence.
It really does. You know, at the very beginning of this deep dive, I mentioned that time anxiety is like the quiet realization that life isn't moving fast enough. But after unpacking all of this, maybe the core problem isn't the speed of life at all. Maybe the problem is simply the speedometer we are choosing to look at.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If the value of your time was measured not by the massive milestones you frantically crossed off a societal list, but by the depth, clarity, and peace of the mundane moments you truly showed up for, how far ahead would you actually be?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a deep breath, try to unplug for just 15 minutes today, let your brain hit save, and most importantly, enjoy the pace of your own unique journey.